I'm delighted that you've come out and that we get to spend some time together. That's the most important part of the experience for me, is what we exchange, not just what I say. So I hope we have an intimate evening. My fiancée, Joy, the love of my life, gave everybody, if you didn't already have it, a journal. And I thought I'd share with you my intention for you having that. And that is, as I'm talking and I'm going to be sharing stories from my life, I'm going to be inviting you to capture some of the most profound experiences you've had in your life for a particular exercise we'll be doing later. So you might be listening to my story and you go, oh, right, that one. And just jot it down because we'll use it later. So, because we're both, I want to tell you about my life, but you'll also have a chance to talk about your life to this evening, okay? So there's that. I thought I'd start off with just a story because this book I finished about a year and a half ago, and it was published about a year ago. And The Real You, Leading Your Life from Your Authentic Self. It's got my autobiographical story laced throughout it in italics. So you hear my story, but you also hear what I did after all of these stories. Some of them are quite tragic and difficult, traumatic, and some are gloriously alive. And I just kept learning, and I kept learning, because that's my calling card, is learning to me is our salvation to the new. And there's also throughout the book invitations for discovery where you can, based on how you may be moved by what I write, you have an exercise that's laid out where you can harvest how it may serve you. What are your own learnings of a similar nature that you can harvest? So let me start with just the opening of the book, and pretty near the beginning of my life. And it's under a subtitle, The Inner Light. Throughout my childhood, whenever I was in the company of adults, I felt compelled to look into their eyes to see if they were shining. Although I rarely encountered adults whose eyes were vibrantly alive, whenever I did, the radiance they were transmitting took my breath away. And it did. For as long as I can remember, I've had a burning curiosity about how these unique individuals kept their light shining when most other adults' eyes were dull and lifeless. In my early teens, I began mustering the courage to ask them. I, an innocent adolescent, would peer as deeply into their eyes as politeness would allow, and say, "Excuse me, I can't help but notice how bright your eyes are. Could you tell me how you keep your light shining?" They would almost always smile at me. They were never bewildered by my question, and they knew exactly what I was talking about. They would begin sharing with me the deeper qualities of life they had discovered that were important to them. They often talked about love, about kindness and giving, about family and relationships. I heard stories of forgiveness, summoning the courage to be true to themselves, and their lifelong passion for learning. During these conversations, I had the distinct impression that something essential was being gifted to me. Thus was born my life's dedication, to live as one of those people whose inner light continued to shine. And that really was the beginning for me. And, as I'll share more of my story, but as I began to learn, all of us come into the world. If you see a baby that's 6 months old, it's just radiant and shining. The authentic self, it can't not be authentic. And it's just amazing and utterly unique at the same time, which is astonishing. And we're all taken by it and bathed by it. And then, of course, life has its way with us. And so we all meet. I've never met a human being that hasn't met some measure of trauma, traumatic circumstances, small or large. And no matter how small or large, the biggest variable also often is how we interpret what happens. That's something that we do. And so when that trauma happens, we often then recoil because it's painful, and we want to avoid that happening again. So we put up a layer of protection, and we begin adapting so that we can please people, and we can be, again, to protect ourselves from being hurt. So the adapted self, or the false self, thus is born. It's not an enemy of us. It's there to protect us. And often, when we're growing up, it's exactly what we needed to survive. If we got an alcoholic father who's about ready to rage at any moment, we get really, really skillful at reading energy, reading signals, so we know how to stay out of the line of fire, because we have to. The challenge is those adapted behaviors, they stay with us long after we're not in the house anymore. So to me, as I wrote the book, what became very evident is the false self. When we discover some of the ways that we protect ourselves, maybe we put up a front and say that we're fine when we're really not. Maybe we get angry. Maybe we withdraw. We all have our own unique patterns of our adapted self. But the false self, once we begin to learn about it, it's essential that we don't make it wrong, because it only makes it stronger and feeds it. What that false or adapted self needs is our love. That's part of the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell's talking about, is how do we come into a conscious authenticity, and how do we reconnect with this authentic self that lives inside. I think we all have had our own experiences, and I'll talk about that. But let me tell you a little bit of some of what happened for me. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, and a lower middle class home. And I had an older sister who was 7 years older than me. So when I was 10, she was 17. And then an older brother who was 15 when I was 10. He was 5 years older. So at 17, my older sister, she started being a heroin addict for the next 15 years. She just went off the edge, and I don't know how she stayed alive. We saw a lot of traumatic expressions from her, and my parents were decimated. Now my brother just went way past what she did. He started a life of crime at 15. He started burglary, then he started kidnapping, then he started becoming a gang member in the Aryan white supremacist brotherhood. He became a leader of the Aryan Brotherhood in the prisons, and he killed a lot of black people. Yeah, here's my sister, there's my brother, and I'm like, oh my God. And my parents are they're just good people. They're just completely floored. I'm surviving, pretending I'm fine, but I'm not. So I'll tell you one of the experiences I had that was, one of my more challenging. Let's see. There's on page 14. Okay. So, and up to 10, by the way, I was doing great. I mean, I was just flourishing. I loved school. I was in Little League Baseball. I had friends. I was doing great. But then I went to junior high, and there were gangs, and there was my brother and sister. So here comes a little bit of what little Gavin faced. And I'm sure what I'm encouraging you to write down is the powerful experiences in your life, whether they're positive or negative. This one marked me, but also blessed me. So I'll share it with you. It's called The Storm Builds. 2 years later, when I was 14, my 19-year-old brother, Michael, kidnapped a couple at gunpoint and was sent to prison. While he was incarcerated, my parents received a report from the prison graphically describing a stabbing he had committed against an African-American fellow prisoner. Within a few years, Michael became one of the leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist gang that extends into the prison system. When I was 16, shortly after he was once again released from prison, Michael swept into the house one afternoon with 3 of his friends, filled with tattoos. I was sitting at our dining room table doing my homework and was the only one home. They hurriedly began pulling rifles down out of the attic. I was shocked. I had no idea there were guns hidden in the house, and found out later that my parents hadn't either. I was shocked and terrified. One by one, my brother and his friends laid the rifles down on the dining room table right in front of me. They discussed plans for an ambush with the intent to kill. The targets were once again African Americans. Michael, my brother, glanced over at me with an eerie look and a smile on his face as he and his friends loaded shiny new bullets into the rifles. I was horrified as this scene unfolded, but also felt paralyzed about what to do, because this was my brother, and I was afraid of him. So those years from 10, 11, 12, all the way through 18, 19, very, very dark years for me. I was just in survival mode. I was afraid if I wasn't careful, I would go and do something like they're doing. I had to be careful. I became very anxious. I became afraid. I separated from people. I felt unworthy. I got good grades. I was really good at pretending I was fine, but I really wasn't. Every couple of months, I would have a meltdown emotionally because I just couldn't handle the pain and let it all out and screaming or crying. And then I'd go back to because I also didn't want to cause my parents any more problems. I mean, they were already dealing with so much. But here's the good news. Everything that happened in those years catapulted me towards psychology and spirituality. First, I went and got a bachelor's and a master's at Cal State University, Northridge. And I was just drawn because, perhaps you're aware, in psychology classes, counseling classes, 3/4 of the students are usually women, and they're safe. I had a place where they could listen. I remember right at the beginning of that, I'd be in a class, and I'd be talking about my experience growing up, like, my brother and sister. And people's jaws would drop. And I remember going, what? Because it's really all I knew. I didn't know it was so bad. I just knew it was what it was. But they're going. And later I realized it was, yeah. I mean, I had a lot. I mean, I still do healing work with all of this that happened because trauma gets healed in layers. But I did a bachelor's and a master's. But I still was lost. And I'll tell you why. Perhaps you're also aware that in psychology classes, for the most part, you learn academically, you learn theory. You don't do your own work. You learn theory, you do role playing. So all of my unhealed issues at the end of the master's, still unhealed. They also, amazingly enough, they never mentioned religion or spirituality at all. It was void, gone. And I hadn't grown up with a religion, so I didn't even know it was missing. So of course what I did, being human, is I figured, I'm the problem. It's me. Something's wrong with me. Because my friends were going out and starting their practice. I couldn't. Thankfully, a year after I graduated, I found another master's degree. Nikki had mentioned the University of Santa Monica. They offer a master's degree program in spiritual psychology. Highly experiential, deep, deep work. Spirituality is at the center, but you also have a chance to do shadow work and deep healing work, and also get in touch with your gifts and dreams. And once the spirituality was included in my life view, it was like I was upside down and it just put me right side up and it set me right on the ground. And I had experiences in front of the class where I just was counseling someone. It wasn't role playing, it was real. And it was so profound. It's like I discovered that was a gift I had, was to be a counselor. I had empathy. I knew consciousness. I knew the world of someone else. I had empathy. And that was at 25. And I'm now 68. So 43 years later, I'm still doing what opened up right at that time. With the talk focused on business success, I was reflecting today because it's like I was no more prepared to be a successful psychotherapist. I couldn't even function. But as soon as the spirituality came in and my authentic self, I started to experience it, I just went right out and started to practice and have been successful ever since. So that's what I'm struck by is what is authentic power and where does spirituality come in, and how does that play out in the business world or the professional world? So I've got that. So then let me tell you one of the rich experiences that I had to balance out the other stories I've told you. Page 4. So I started to have very rich inner experiences, which just changed my life. The river of light. In my early 20s, I had a life-changing dream in which I was walking through a forest. I heard the sound of a river roaring up ahead. As I moved through a dense stand of trees toward the melody of the rushing water, a flowing river of pure, shimmering light came into view. It was incandescent gold. It was a powerful and glorious sight. As I got closer, I recognized that my spiritual teacher at the time, who was new in my life, was standing in the middle of the river. He was looking directly at me and beckoning me to join him in the healing flow of water. As I got still closer, my teacher gently pointed upstream, and as my eyes gazed in that direction, I saw his teacher was also standing in the middle of the river. At that moment, the silent underlying revelation I received was that this river was not about my teacher or even his teacher. Rather, it was a flow of sacred healing light that lived within all of humanity. Filled with the realization that our deepest nature is divine light, I gracefully strode into the river, immersing myself in the shimmering gold. And I write, I've been standing in that healing river, energy of that river ever since, and have been privileged to assist many others to embrace their own river of light, which is their authentic self. I'm now beckoning you to join me in this river, to take the place that is awaiting you. After all, this sacred river is your birthright. So, continuing to deepen a relationship with my authentic self throughout my life has enabled me to heal and glean the learning from my turbulent teen years when my sister and brother walked their dark paths and our family was decimated in their wake. The deep wisdom and love of my true nature assisted me in overcoming untold suffering later in life. And then I go on. So, the thing that I've been compellingly interested in ever since is I meet people who have had powerful spiritual experiences. Some of them had them long ago and they haven't had them since. Some of them are still having them now. But I'm interested in how do we cultivate getting closer to that experience inside. I'm not interested in the name. We could call it authentic self, we could call it divine, we could call it soul. All of those are synonymous to me. But it's like, how do we cultivate a relationship with that deeper part of our nature? Lincoln called it the highest angels of our nature, something like that. So, and what I find as I work with people in my practice, it's much more readily available than most people even consider. It's just, it's readily available. And so we'll talk more about that tonight. So I have that. So for me, at that juncture in my life, I began to have a relationship with the invisible, whether it was intuitive, whether there was revelations or dreams. But there's a relationship with something greater than me that became a very central part of my life. But it wasn't religious. I'm really not even interested in beliefs. I like the direct experience. And what I'm struck by too is that everybody's has an authentic self, but it's also remarkably unique. It's like every one of us, there'll never be another one of us that's like us, before us, or now or after. We're unique. That's why I always like looking in people's eyes, and it's like meeting a new soul is one of the most glorious things in the world, because I've never met a soul like this. So thankfully that university was teaching that program, and it turned my life around. So the book is in three sections, just so you have an idea. The first is all about an orientation to the soul or the authentic self. What does it look like when you're looking out of the eyes through a soul? What is it like when you live your life as a soul? Is there curriculum that you can learn? I found that there is. I think we each have a soul's curriculum that's very common things we often learn that are central, over and above learning how to love, which I think is common to all of us. And so that's the first section, is really getting oriented to, well, okay, let's assume for a second there is this grand place inside. What's it like to live from there? I only wish when I was 7 somebody would have started talking about that, but they didn't. They didn't. So the second section is all the different ways, once you begin to touch into your authentic self, how you can become more rooted in it, deeper in it. And part of that work is doing healing work with some of the trauma that we faced. And one of the beauties that I remember discovering, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, is I used to, when I started being spiritual, always want to be high. I love being high. I love being in oneness. But after about 5 years of that, I realized that I was running from something. There was some place that was not high, and it was not happy, and it was calling out to me, and I was abandoning it. So one of the things I learned in my own process as well as in my practice is the light that we touch into, the divine, the healing presence, compassion, love. The purpose of it is to go and be with those places inside of us that have not yet experienced that, and they're yearning for it. So in this middle section, I talk about all the ways you can begin to do that work. So there's a chapter in there called Multiplicity of Selves, Healing Our Inner Family. Because we all have many aspects inside. If you're looking to change jobs and move cross country, there's probably a part that says, wow, what an adventure, I can't wait to go. And you got another part that goes, oh shit, we could fail. This is not good. This, security becomes an issue and it does not want to stay. So how do you work out, how do you reconcile two different consciousnesses? Because they are, and they're both inside of you. And how does the authentic self extend itself to a part that's hurt? And I find very readily. Most of us did not have parents. My parents never considered, and they're lovely people. I mean, they're gone. And I love them dearly. Did they ever consider that maybe I was having a hard time with what was going on with my brother and sister? Never occurred to them. I swear to God. Never occurred to them. They were just consumed. I just tried to stay out of the way. But, have I spent a lot of time taking the best part of my love and my awareness of forgiveness and compassion and tenderness? Have I gone back into that scene at that dining room table where that happened with my brother and I was frozen? Many, many, many times. And each time I'm able to get closer, spend time with him, caress him, talk to him, tell him I'm here now, we're together. I think all of our own healing journey is different. It's unique to each of us. But if we do it, we can transform the difficulties in our lives, and we can become greater and more whole. If we avoid it or we don't know how, we limit how fully we can spread our wings. And so that's the whole second section, is how do you do a lot of that deepening and maturing with the human and the divine? Because we carry both. Now the whole third section is when we do get rooted in who we are, the common experience that's universal is we want to serve. We want to get in touch with our gifts. We want to get in touch with our calling and the fulfillment that comes with giving it away. And it doesn't mean we have to be Mother Teresa. It could be we have 2 children and we love them for, decades. It's not about how big, but can we begin to recognize how precious we are, how gifted we are? Can we affirm ourselves? We're the ones that know how to affirm and heal ourselves better than anybody else. It helps to have someone who holds with you in that sacred process. That's where I get invited in, and I'm very privileged to do that. So with that in mind, let's see. Page 25, what was I thinking there? I'm going to find out. Yes. So you might say, well, okay, you gave the talk. This is about business, right? So now you're talking about spirituality and healing and trauma and tenderness, and what's the deal on that? Well, business is kind of like a bugaboo for, we can't be ourselves there. We can't be personal there. Somehow it's a land where we have to, partition ourselves and not be ourselves. And nothing can be further from the truth. The people who have successful businesses, invariably, they know about their gifts. They're letting their light shine. I think of Oprah. I don't know how she grew up, but somehow she got a hold of something, and she's just been, at least in my eyes, radiating it ever since. And you look at Yo-Yo Ma. He plays the cello, and it's like blesses everybody within that can see him or hear him. So how do we do that? Well, to me, it's our deeper nature is where our gifts are. It's where our vision. So the nature of business, in my experience, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and people in corporations, it's all built on relationships. It's relationships. If you're going to be successful in business, it's because you know how to build relationships, teams. You know how to bring out the best in people. You know how to nurture them in the long term. And so I've got here, restoring trust and relationship. The foundation of all life is relationship. For everything in the universe, there we go, exists in relation to everything else. The depth of fulfillment that we have in life is directly proportional to the level of genuine intimacy we have with ourselves, others, and the world that surrounds us. Relationships flourish when they're built upon enduring trust. Now here's the key. By its nature, emotional trauma is the result of painful experiences in relationship. So the trauma occurs in relationship, it's where it can be healed. That's why we're drawn to have a partner. That's why when we're with a romantic partner, we get triggered because we have unresolved issues. They get triggered. If we know that and we say, okay, I don't like this, but I've got some work to do, versus how dare you say that to me in that way, and then you polarize and you say the source of the upset is outside. It's not. So I have a chapter in here all about relationship and how to play it from a deeper level so you harvest what happens in the relationship. So challenges bring you closer and you can heal and heal in ways that you often can't without being in relationship. Relationship is so powerful. So business, anybody I've come to me as a client in business, they're having challenges with their boss. They're having challenges with their team. They're having challenges with themselves in the business. Relationship is the territory. So let me play a video for you. Let's see if we can do that. Here he is in prison for all those years. While he was there, he was taking leadership. He was developing his consciousness. He was reading. He was learning about his country and history. And he was planning to step into leadership when he got out. But he had to demonstrate internal leadership so that in the oppression, being at the brunt of violence, of having power just stripped away from him outwardly, he retained his dignity. He didn't act in a vengeful way with those who were abusing him. He didn't move into judgment, indictment. He understood they were blind. They could not see. It wasn't personal to him. So all of the things that he did when he got out of prison, all the seeds for that to occur was a result of the things he did inside his consciousness while he was in prison. A lot of my work with people focuses on them coming into a consciousness of authentic leadership. And authentic leadership, or leadership in general, is typically thought of as an outer thing that we do with other people. But that's not the source of leadership. The source of leadership is taking leadership in our own consciousness. When we're up against a pattern or a challenge or pain or a tendency to judge ourselves, a tendency to collapse and give up, how do we get a hold of a consciousness? And to me, that consciousness is the authentic self. The one that actually is capable of leading and taking charge inside in a compassionate way, with strength and with wisdom. And as we begin to face our own challenges in our relationship with ourself from the authentic self, with leadership, and there's many, many, many different ways to do that, we naturally begin to be effective in leading other people.
So it starts on the inside.
It starts on the inside. It naturally flows from the inside to the outside. For years, I felt unworthy and felt ashamed as my primary way of experiencing myself in this world. You know, I've had to do a lot of work to get a hold of who I am and my dignity and my compassion and my seeing through wise eyes. And I keep working on it more all the time, every day. There's always room to grow. But thinking back, it's hard to comprehend how far I've traveled in terms of how I saw the world and myself and how I see myself now in the world. One of my favorite words, not because it's a Christian word, but is resurrection. I'm just astonished at how the human consciousness can actually wake up, evolve, come into triumph, come into strength, rise in the face of difficulty. That's just thrilling to me. You came and were interested in the framing of business and the authentic self. What I'm proposing, and my experience has been, is if you view what's happening in your career, your profession, your current work, maybe your desire for more fulfillment, that whole territory, if you view it as an opportunity to learn and grow in consciousness, what are the lessons? What am I learning? How can I harvest something from this? It's not like you've got a boss that's oppressive, that's all he does for a living. But how do you deal with an oppressive boss? Maybe you should have resigned 4 years ago, but you didn't. And now it's kind of you're getting pushed out. There's all different ways it can look. From an authentic self standpoint, I look at life, all of life is trying to grow us with everything that happens. I had a spiritual teacher that once said, and I don't know if this is accurate, but it fit a lot of my experience. He said, this world is 8-to-1 negative. It's not easy. It's fierce, but it's a school. It's a school that trains you, and it trains you towards becoming more of who we are, becoming stronger. I think of Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi, and the way he was building up that kid. So it's like how I remember I had 2 boys later in my first marriage. And when they were 16 and 14, everything was doing great before then. We're homeschooled for 7 years, loved it, was great. Then the older boy had a psychotic break out of nowhere. He thought he was God, and he took off his clothes in the school bus. And immediately, all of his friends scared, they backed away. He couldn't function that much because he had a psychotic break. We had to put him on a 72-hour hold. And then he started using drugs, which is very common when this was schizophrenia he was dealing with. This came out of nowhere. Simultaneously, the 14-year-old, that first one I mentioned was 16, and 14, bipolar disorder, serious, with serious drug abuse. So for 5 years, this kind of ravaged our family. And some of you perhaps have had or know people who have had this experience. Just having one tears apart a marriage, and this did tear apart our marriage. But I remember praying, one of my richest experiences. I saw that this was like a tsunami coming, and it was bigger than I could handle. And I said, Spirit, you got it. Can you give me anything here? And I got an answer. I don't always get a verbal answer, but I did. And it was, Gavin, if you begin to relate to anything that's going to happen to you or your family as anything but a gift from God, a gift from Spirit, you're off course. And I went, now, it was helpful because I started looking for purpose versus just feeling just horribly victimized and traumatized by the whole thing, which it was also that. But I did grow. I grew a lot. I grew a lot psychologically. I grew a lot spiritually. I can't tell you how many people I've helped now dealing with that situation because I've been there and I know it, you know. So my point being that as we get more rooted in who we are, and perhaps you've experienced this, we start to have visions. We start to have callings. It's not easy to listen to them because they encourage us to risk and be adventurous, and it's scary, and we might need support. But there's often a desire to serve. It's nothing quite like having overflow come over and you can help other people. So.
So here today, you just finished this book you've been working on for 1.5 years. What would you say to people out there who, you know, or feel the call to embark on projects, but no, it's not going to happen overnight? I mean, what would you?
First thing I would be is encouraging to dare to go after something that you feel is bigger than you.
and let it have its way with you, because that's how this project has been with me. Once I got a hold of the tiger's tail, and it's running through the forest with all the close trees, and I'm just moving like this, but it is being used for a larger purpose. It's very clear. So it's like somebody who tries to climb into a castle and they throw the hook up, and throw the hook high. Throw the hook high, and then look around for people to support you getting up that wall.
That's beautiful. Throw the hook high.
Throw the hook high.
Yeah.
And you've been there to support me as my most stalwart supporter, but there have been many, many others. There's no way it could have happened without them. But I had to throw the hook high. And to me, throwing the hook high was the depth and the breadth of the book that I chose to write. It was not a simple book to write. It wasn't for me. To write about human consciousness and all these elements of life and how you approach life in all of its forms. I could have written a book about 2 of the chapters, and that could have been a book, but it was 16 chapters. So, ambitious, yes. Does it make it all the more sweeter because I did it? It really does.
And I can confess, I was invited for 10 years to write that book, and I refused. I refused until that man sat in front of me and he saw me. He invited me forward, and I saw that he could help me. And then we went. And I'll share with you, talking about how life does what it does with us. He's been the best friend I've ever had for 7 years. His name is James Mahaley. I dedicated the book. He's the editor. There's no way the book would have been, my voice wouldn't have been found without him. That's what's amazing is people come. But 6 weeks ago, after a year of challenge, deterioration, he committed suicide. I lost my best friend, which is just like, wow, I didn't see that coming. You know, in the book, I talk about experiences like this. You know, it's like, you know, we don't, outside of our own skin, we don't have control, you know? So that's the next thing I want to talk about before we open it up. And that is relative to business, relative to the business of life, parenting, creativity, vulnerability is so essential as a fulfilling way to live. Is when we can dare to be transparent about what's going on with us at a human level, at a divine level, when we can have safety. That's when trauma gets healed, trust gets reestablished in relationships. Vulnerability is often viewed as a weakness. My experience is that it's not. It's actually a strength. If we can turn to vulnerability when we're up against a challenge, I'm sure you've had an occasion where maybe you've done something that you feel really terrible about to somebody you really care about, and then for some reason you have the gumption to go and sincerely apologize to them. You say, I'm sorry, I'm off. This is not you, this is mine, I'm sorry. And they let you right back in, and there you go. So vulnerability is, I'm a big fan of the poet David White. He's an Irish poet, and he writes about vulnerability beautifully. So, what I'd like to invite everybody to do, I've shared a number of my life stories, including a recent one, is if you want to look at your journal, if you happen to have written down some of the powerful experiences you've had in your life, let's just take another minute or so to just write down any more if you want to add anything to them. Anything that came to you. It doesn't have to be the most powerful, but you're looking for things that had a profound impact that changed the course of your life. So, if you're called, I just want to make a little room if anybody would like to share one of your experiences briefly with the group. It can be a rich experience to do that. There's no pressure here. It's not about that. It's just we're in a safe space, it seems to me. And if you are called to share the experience you had and how it impacted your life, just in 2-3 minutes. Anybody like to do that? Yes.
Well, this isn't, well, I will share one of my experiences. As a poet, I was at a expressive arts conference and I was performing this poem called Water Baby, in which I talk about giving birth to my daughter in the bathtub, which was a fantastic, quick experience. And this woman came up to me afterwards who was pregnant, and she said, oh my God, she was in tears. She's like, you know, I've been thinking about whether or not to have a water birth, and you've convinced me. And I was like, that was awesome. But one thing I would like to share with everybody that I just heard in a Ted Lasso episode, this guy was talking about a woman that he had broken up with, and he said, it didn't happen to me, it happened for me. I was like, oh my God! Wrote that down.
That's it. There's one letter out of this thing. 2 to 4. Yeah. Well, that's like, you know, what happened to me. I mean, look at the way it catapulted in my life in the direction of it. But I did need to harvest that direction. I did need to. But thankfully, there were people that helped me along. You know, thankfully, I stumbled upon more opening. I'll share with you briefly, and then I want to welcome somebody else sharing about my brother, because after 15 years of doing all that he did, one day. And he started reflecting on his life. He wasn't really happy. He was very angry. He looked like Manson. He had tattoos all over. So one day, a prison ministry volunteer came and talked to him. They spoke about Jesus Christ, and my brother had a complete, across-the-board religious conversion. Everything that he had been, all that hatred was gone. He became mild and wise, and he became a model inmate. They let him out early. And I'll tell you how dedicated he was. Listen to this. He gets out early. Now, it's pretty dangerous leaving the Aryan Brotherhood because he's got all their secrets. You know, they usually don't let that happen, but they respected him. But there was one murder he did not ever deal with. So here he was. Now he's got a relationship with Christ. He feels liberated. He's in a community in Oregon, and he's haunted because he has this one murder he never reconciled. It's getting in the way of his relationship. He wrote a letter and confessed to a murder. Knowing he'd go back to prison, he did go back to prison. They didn't give him much time because they saw what he did. The detective that came from California to get him testified to the judge about his character because he was quite remarkable. This was no game. And then he went back out once he was released, and he worked with youth in his church for 7 years. You know, he still had tattoos, but he was clean shaven. But he talked. He made such a powerful impact on those teens. And then, strangely enough, he was driving down the road. He was married. He was going to have a kid. He was in nursing school. Elder in the church. Went off the road and hit a tree, and he died. 42. I mean, what a life, you know? And never forget his memorial service.
Amazing.
They're putting him in the ground, and the teens are just, they're so bereft. They're touching the dirt to get close to him for one final time as it's going down. And there's 4 hours of testimony. People just testifying what he meant to them. So it's just like, talk about false self, authentic self. And who'd have thought that all of what he went through would end up serving him over here? So happened to him, you know, for him. So there's that story. Anyone else like to share about a rich experience they had in their lives that changed the course of your life? Want to share? Yes.
Well, it's just, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's funny that we both said, well, I wrote motherhood and he wrote parenthood. So we had both been on pretty much of a spiritual path for quite a while, for years. And we met in India studying yoga. And we had been doing these just seemingly really difficult practices and silent meditation retreats and yoga and all these different things for years. And then when I became a mother, when I went in, it was on Big Island, we were living in Hawaii, and I had a really insane 72-hour labor, which was quite difficult. Actually, it was mildly psychedelic. I mean, it was the whole journey that we were just talking about it. And then my daughter is finally born, and I mean, I feel like there's so many other things that have happened in my life that were quite traumatic growing up. But that just stopped me in my tracks. And we both said the same thing. It's like, at that moment, it was no longer about us. Like, it was no longer, whether it was my traumas or my high moments or my good moments, they were all mine. And then the second she came out and she was born, it was no longer about me. And she is like, all her signs are in fire, and she's as busy as 3 different kids put together, and it's been a handful. And she just graduated. She started college in San Francisco, which is why we came back from Hawaii, and we just landed here in Ashland recently. But the last 2 decades, that was like what came up for both of us.
Yeah.
Because it was just such a journey where it truly is like your heart is outside your body, and it's not just about you anymore. And that was when I feel like all these other practices I had done, and that became a real practice at that moment, and it's just been a journey.
Wow.
So I think every parent understands that. But
Yeah. But the whole landscape of your life just shifted. And you weren't even planning on it, it just happened.
I never wanted to have kids. And I never planned to have kids, and now I think, my gosh, everything I was telling you that I'm doing coaching, but mostly what I'm coaching is mothers, because I can so support and understand, they just need support.
Yeah, they do.
You know?
They do. It's so misunderstood.
And it's not something that's possible to understand until it happens. But it's funny that we were both like, that was such a turning point.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah. I want to do one exercise quickly with everyone, maybe beneficial to you, and then we'll just open it up for some questions. But if you just take a blank page with your journal there. And so can you go to the next slide, Lucy? So, cultivating a connection with your authentic self. Again, I've told you, I'm astonished at how available our connection is, a conscious connection with our depth. All that's required for this intimate partnership to develop is a willingness to enter into heartfelt dialogue with your authentic self in a consistent way over time. So I talk about this a lot in the book. Just that we do now. Can you go to the next one, Missy? So our authentic self is uniquely capable of establishing a sincere connection and dialogue with our inner choir of voices, as one by one they feel safe to emerge. These distinct, boy, look at the spelling, aspects can then learn about each other and their respective needs. So, I'm eminently human. So here's what I'd like to suggest. If you go to the next slide. So this is an invitation again. So I'm going to read this. Take the next 3 minutes to capture in writing a dialogue between your everyday conscious self. You can write CS, and your authentic self, AS. So you'll actually write on your piece of paper, CS, I'd like to talk to you about my relationship or my health or whatever. Then you put AS, and you put AS and colon, and you don't know what you're going to say as the authentic self until you start writing. So this isn't a mental thing. You're actually assuming there's 2 different consciousnesses inside of you. There is. Invite each of them to respond to what the other has just shared, as the intention here is to develop a partnership that allows each of them to be genuinely heard and understood by the other. Feel free to ask your authentic self for its unique perspective about any challenges or creative opportunities that are currently in play in your business or professional or personal life at this time. So I'm inviting you into simply an exploration. Let's play with this. See what happens. But put CS, colon, and you'll have 3 minutes, but start writing. Don't write too much because you want to give the authentic self a chance to respond. So keep your answers, keep your responses brief, but they need to respond to each other. Any questions? Is that clear? Okay. Mm-hmm. So you can write down CS, colon, and away you go. So if you want to keep writing, you can, but let's also just check in. Your experience may have been ordinary, or you may have received something that was a revelation or something very helpful to you. Would any of you like to share your experience? Yes.
So yeah, this is right now a pretty spot-on story, because so I started with my authentic self asking the questions: how are you feeling about your business?
Can you speak a little louder? I want to hear you.
Yeah, I started with my authentic self asking.
Yeah, I see. Yes, good.
How do you feel about your business? And my conscious self saying, you know, frustrated yet deep down I'm aware of a trust and a calm, but I want to trust more in the unexpected,
Yeah.
in things I can't see, and ways to move my relaunching in a whole new way of my work.
Yeah.
Because I'm not long here, just a couple of years, and I'm just relaunching my work in a very, very different way.
Yes.
But I don't know, I'm not a marketer. So, and then the answer was, don't worry, be happy, which is a Meher Baba word, which I think is very, your work is going just fine, just look at who is sitting next to you. So this young man, I've never met him before,
Yeah.
Someone told me about this man that goes around and puts your fly.
Yes. Yeah, he did for us too. Yeah. Simgen.
And but then prioritize your joy and stillness even more than you're doing now, and trust. But I just thought this was lovely. Like, you know, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I did get a sense of it was my authentic self. I just waited like I do when I'm teaching, and it's like there's a sense of the conscious self is a smaller, more sort of antsy little voice.
Tentative.
The authentic self is, I know it very well because it happens when I teach, but it's you know, it really comes in, and it's and this would be a good exercise for me to do on a daily basis.
Yes. Yeah, and I want to say more about it. And I love that you recognize that the experience of each of them, each aspect was distinctly different.
Yeah.
It's very common. And the best way to do this, in my experience, is to set two chairs across from each other, and you physically move. So because when you sit over here, that place has the floor, it has a presence and a voice, it gets honored. But again, you're responding to what the other aspect said, and then you go back and forth. It's uncanny how we can do this. And you can do it in writing, you can do it with a chair, you know, dialogue. A lot of this is built upon Hal and Sidra Stone's work, voice dialogue. But this same exercise, the same dynamic, if you are considering a major move in your business. You might have one place that's tentative and afraid, let it talk. It needs to talk. Another place that's feeling adventurous, say, we're gonna go. Now usually what we do is we toggle back and forth between the fear and then the brave, but we're not aligned.
No.
By talking and responding to each other and having empathy for each other, they often can get on the same page with like, okay, I'll be brave, but I'm going to be listening to you. I'm going to make room to hear your fears, and if you need anything, and I'm here. And then they start partnering. It's really powerful work. You know, the multiplicity of selves in dialoguing is amazing. Anybody else have an experience they want to share? Yeah.
I think that one thing that I experienced by doing this exercise is that I felt like really happy. I felt really happy about having this conversation with myself. It felt like talking with an old friend, you know, who is always there for me. So, you know, I just felt like so grateful and, you know, so happy, you know, to have this, you know, conversation through this. So, you know, for me that was a plus.
Wow.
Big plus, you know, tonight.
Wow. Well, you make my year. You make my day. And I want to tell you, you have this for the rest of your life. What we typically do is we're as humans, we have an experience, let's say we're afraid, we get totally identified with fear. But if we just put fear in one place, and then over here is the authentic self, as soon as we leave that place and come here, before this place says anything, we're not in fear anymore. We're free. We're free. It's just, and then, but a friendship will start to develop. If my suggestion to all of you, spend 30 days doing this for 10 minutes a day, you will be blown away. And it can develop for the rest of your life. It's readily available. That's what's amazing. So, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll be with it. Yes?
Talk to my stuffed animals.
Yes, good for you.
You know, I have them all. Lion, snow lion, bear, And I said, you're going to bed with me tonight, but you have to stay and guard the sofa.
Yes.
I give them a job.
Yes.
And I'll wake you up in the morning.
Yes.
I play with my animals.
Yes.
Those are not real.
No, it's real. It's probably one of the richest parts of your day.
I just love them and cuddle them and comb their hair, you know, like they're people.
Yeah. All of that's very real.
I'll be back. I know. But
I
I'll be
know.
back.
Yeah.
But it's pretend. Einstein said the greatest thing you can have is your imagination.
I understand. It is.
It's nice to have intellect too.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful. Joy has a relationship with our animals and our stuffed animals, and puppets and things, and she just, oh God, she's just, a whole other part of her just starts coming out. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
So we have a cast. Sometimes clients, they do this work and they're kind of blown away and they go, does this mean I'm schizophrenic? I say, at least. At least. So there's, we got characters. So I want to make room to answer any questions you might have about me, anything that I presented, anything about my work if you happen to be curious. If you have any, I just want to make room for it. So. Okay.
So you work with businesses, you said, and leadership. Do you work with small, fry, little, self-employed people like me?
Yeah. I often work with entrepreneurs that are highly progressive, very successful, maybe 2 or 3 people in their company, media influencers. They might have a team around them. And where I love to work is working with a couple who are entrepreneurs. Either they each have their own business or together, because that's a unique situation, and I love doing couples work. I've done it for 40 years. So it's progressive leaders that are, people come my way when they're ready to just make a major turn in their life in a new direction. And I get to be their support while they do that.
Well, I'm just one, just me.
That's,
Me,
no,
myself, and I.
yeah,
And,
no, that's, I often work with solopreneurs.
but definitely progressive and big visions.
Yeah.
Hey.
Oh, yes. Well, let me say a couple things. If you want to, I have these for sale if you'd like. They're $24.95. They're here. I could sign them if you'd like that. You also can learn more about me at my website, gavinfrye.com, GAVINFRYE.com. Joy and I do workshops. You can find more about that on my website. I also offer twice a month this very rich thing called Soul Gatherings with Gavin. So on Sundays from 10:30 in the morning until 12, it's online. People come together, and I have exercises like this and themes like this, and the community is building. And it's relatively inexpensive. It's $40 a month. So it's for 3 hours worth of community building. And then also, I have, if you want to be added to my email list, on your way out, you can sign your name and your phone and your email. Then I'll stay in touch with you. And I'll be here afterwards to sign books. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you live here in Ashland or?
Mount Chester, we live in Mount Chester.
You live in Manchester?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's good.
yeah. We met 10 months ago, and we're engaged to be married. And it's the most glorious thing that has happened after years of prayer. And we kind of sense we were that close right from the beginning. So,
Awesome.
and we both do soul-inspired work. We both do similar work. So it's nice to be here with all of you.
Yeah. Wish you well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Feel free to talk to me, afterwards. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, let's do the sign up, we'll pass it around.
Okay, good. Can you go to the next sheet, Missy? There you go. Okay.
I have Louis the cat. Give him a little rat dog.
Look at that. We ended on time. Thanks for coming and thanks for participating. Okay.